Good evening and welcome to Talking Point. I'm your host, Dr. Korayo and Wright, coming to you live from the studios of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation in Accra. We come to you live this and every Sunday with issues of national concern and engage you in discussions for informed decision-making. Talking Point is brought to you in partnership with ATL, who are sponsoring my outfit. The fabric provided by ATL was sewn by Haylux Fashion. We're also streaming live on GBC Ghana Online, on Facebook at Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, and as always, we welcome those listening to us on Unique 95.7. Last week, Vice President Bawumia delivered his highly anticipated speech on the state of the economy. Did his 129-page document adequately address all the outstanding questions that have been posed by Ghanaians since the recent economic hardship began? And did it assure us of better days ahead? Tonight, we'll closely examine his presentation within the context of measuring the health of our economy. How are we faring? And is there light at the end of the economic tunnel in which we find ourselves? This and more on tonight's Talking Point. We encourage you to join in the discussion during the show by sending your questions to our WhatsApp number 055-744-6429. With me for tonight's discussion is from my immediate left, Professor John Gachi. He's the Dean of the University of Cape Coast School of Business. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And on my far left is Dr. Bernard Okoboy. He's a former MP for Lejokuku. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So we all watched Vice President Bawumia's, or at least read, whichever way, his presentation last week. So I wanted to just start with a very general assessment before we delve into the details. So let me start with you, Dr. Boy. What was your assessment, again in general terms, of his presentation?
Well, first of all, let me say a very good evening to all your viewers. Sorry, let me say a very good evening also to Prof. And it's the first time I'm with him on the show. I'm very happy to be here. Today is exactly 1 year since Mrs. Mary Bano, the one who's Atam Warren, she passed. She's the mother of Dr. Dechi Kwatin, Vice Dean, School of Medical Sciences. Cape Coast.
Oh, interesting,
yes,
isn't it?
He's a senior brother.
I see.
I just took the shirt, and it happened that today is exactly 1 year.
Wow.
So may her soul
may she rest in peace, indeed, yes.
Let me say that Dr. Bawumia, I'm excited that Ghanaians still have some faith in him since we started experiencing, especially in this first quarter, rapid depreciation of the CD, an increase in price of goods generally for the past few months. People were like, but where's Doc? Doc must speak. Doc must speak. It's an indication that people believe that he understands the dynamics of the economy and maybe he can tell us what is happening. And the youth wing of the party, TESCON, had their more or less congress and he was the main speaker. And let me briefly say that I was there at Yesu Krum, and Doc virtually painted or told us the picture before we came into office, the picture of this country before COVID struck, the picture in the midst of COVID and on the way out of COVID, as in recovery or this post-COVID period. And I think he did a good job at telling us what was happening. I mean, basically, he answered some questions, which a lot of people have been asking. And he did so for us to appreciate where we are. You know, we are not an island. And usually it's difficult to assess a student if you don't have an idea of the general performance or what was happening before that student came to the class. So Dr. Bawumia reminded us that before we came into office 2017, Ghana was a country with very high lending rates. Ghana was a country that was growing about 3.5%. Ghana was a country that had inflation that was more than 15%, it was about 15.4. Ghana was a country that basically had a crisis in the financial sector. There were banks in this country that couldn't give money to customers who had money with them. So it was not an easy picture with this country. Even power was not stable for about 3 years. When we came, what we did was that we said, look, what this country must move towards is towards production. We must be a country that must produce what we use and what we eat. And we must focus less on taxation and hence from taxation to production. So what we did, we abolished some taxes that we've thought were inimical to economic activity. We also introduced capital-intensive programs like a free SHS, so that it will cushion the vulnerable and not necessarily the poor, but it will more or less also save the rich some money that they will use to pay their kids' fees and provide some opportunity for the poor. Ghana was a country that was able to more or less double the growth rate, and the average estimation of economic activity, the whole country, how things are moving, is normally you estimate one of the factors, indicators is the GDP growth rate. We doubled the growth rate to about 7. In fact, I'm also happy to mention that inflation trended downwards within the first 1 year. The only indicator of the economy, which I admit was more or less one that was not in good shape or was not in a pleasant shape like the others, is the debt to GDP. Our debts went up when we met about when they rebased. They were, before we came, it was doing around 58, 59. Before COVID, we had reached about 68% of GDP, and then we went to about 80%. So what Dr. Bawumia basically did was that we were a country that had been mismanaged to the extent that we had to go to the IMF for policy credibility. When we came, we continue with fiscal consolidation. We put things together. We were even able to exit the IMF program. And then unfortunately, COVID struck.
Okay. Now, so we'll go into details. So I just wanted you to just give a summary, and then we'll get into those details. So
absolutely. So in a minute, what I'll say is that when COVID struck, COVID made us put aside our fiscal consolidation, meaning we're trying to spend what we have and try to be disciplined, what they refer to as fiscal discipline, not to borrow money and spend recklessly. But when COVID struck, we had a situation where economic activity was very much reduced, in some places to zero. So in order to make sure that we save lives and livelihoods, we had to pay teachers who were at home, although our revenues had come down. And that made us build some debts and also reduced our revenues.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the debt to GDP ratio really came
of course, was negatively affected. And also expenditure, we couldn't, revenue, we couldn't get what we needed. So that also further worsened our fiscal deficit situation. And then let me say that he also made us understand that now, we are almost out of the COVID. Recovery is happening. Growth in 2021 was 5%. The last quarter, in fact, the whole year was about 5%, compared to 0.4 in 2020. It tells you that things are picking up. And if we continue on this trend, with time, things will get better.
Okay. All right. So, Professor Gatsi, your comments on general assessment and...
All right. Thank you very much. Well, I think there are two perspectives as to why Ghanaians were calling Dr. Bawumia to speak. One, those in his party feel that they are humiliated because of the economic output that Ghanaians are experiencing. Where is he? Won't it come and speak to see if there will be some respite in his speech? That was one of the reasons for the lecture. The second reason is that it's like virtually those who are feeling the pinch of inflation, exchange rate volatility, loss of jobs, rising prices, etc. The things that he told Ghanaians, they are not seeing that. It's as if they are virtually mocking him. So why won't it come and see whether he could speak? So some people are calling Dr. Bawumia to speak not because they believe his speech would turn things around. It's as a result of laughing at the things they are seeing. I think some issues have been explained. I think if you look at the journey from 2017, it was to build up on the gains in 2016. Inflation peaked at 19%, but due to policy engagement, inflation reduced to 15.4% at the end of 2016. So the expectation was that anybody who is managing the economy at that time, we should see nothing but a downward trend in inflation, which we saw. Again, volatility of currency was stabilized. And we also expected that anyone who took the economy from 2017 should ensure that that stability continues. The same thing applies to other sectors of the economy. So it's not as if the economy situation was going into a worse situation. It was moving from a worse situation to a better space before governance changed hand. So we didn't expect anything from the good performance we saw in 2017 as a result of the investment in 2015 and 2017. Now, when you are doing a presentation, you are supposed to let your audience know the purpose of the presentation. And Dr. Bawumia did that by saying that the issue about national economies and how well individual countries are handling their respective economic situations appear to be the most important thing for people. So he has in mind that he wants to let people know how they have managed the economy in COVID, and to establish at one breath that the economy was very good. It is only because of COVID and later Russia-Ukraine crisis. He wants to convince people. Then if he is not able to convince people, then he wants to prove to the people that the bad situation before COVID was occasioned by, 1, financial sector cleanup, 2, the excess capacity payment. Then he outlined the figures. In outlining the figures, I want to go to COVID first.
Okay. So
He mentioned that the total amount is 8.1 billion. Now, if you look at table 8, that was presented, table 7, table 8, he sought to give us the debt to GDP situation, to provide the information that we have been much more hit by COVID.
Table 8 is what page?
what page?
Well, you can check the page, but I have the table numbers here.
You go ahead, though. After this, we'll just go into more details,
Yeah.
because
So
I don't want
if you look at table 4, table 7, table 8, so he wanted to project the picture that, look, if you look at deficit on table 4, the deficit in Nigeria moved up by 1.27 factor.
Page 33, yeah.
Yeah. Then you go to Egypt by 1.02, and you come to Ghana 3.1, which means that is the highest, effect of deficit. But that picture clearly, when you look at it, is projecting the government as not being able to manage the deficit well, if you compare it to the peers. So you look at your factor in terms of movement of deficit was 3.1, but that of your peers were below you, which means your peers are able to manage their deficit better than you did.
Okay.
So that is one important thing that the government itself has thrown to the people, that I didn't manage my deficit well. Now,
so just if you can wrap
I think I
up
want
so
to finish with this table.
Okay.
Now, when you look at the data the government presented to IMF, the data showed that in 2019, the deficit was 7.5. Now, if you recalculate this factor increase by 7.5, it means actually we move by just 2 factor points. But because the government wanted to portray that I am much more hit by COVID-19, they rather presented a picture that they have not been able to manage the situation well, when in reality the factor should have been 2.
Okay, all right. So what I wanted us to try and do is, one of the things that the Vice President said in his remarks was that it's what you feel in your pocket that makes a difference. And so I want us to imagine that the people who are watching us are not necessarily too much interested in the graphs and the bar charts and all those things, because they are more interested in what it is that they are feeling, experiencing.
But then when we are doing economic analysis,
I understand.
And
I
think I need to make this
No,
point.
I understand
when we are explaining economic analysis, we describe graph as something that gives quick visual impression.
Which is fine. And
so
what I'm saying is that I want us to go into other parts.
The quick visual impression.
So what I wanted to talk about next was youth unemployment. because I think that is an area that is very critical for many Ghanaians. So some of there was something in what the Vice President said. He mentioned that there had been a lot of job creations. Getting to the end of his presentation, he mentioned creation of jobs. I do know that. And he also mentioned that they stopped the freeze on recruitment in the public sector, and hundreds of thousands of people have been recruited. So in February this year, the Employment and Labor Relations Minister indicated that Ghana is among the countries with the lowest figures of unemployment in the world, and that the unemployment rate apparently hit 13.4% in 2021, which he said was up from 6% in 2020. Now, there was an article by CGTN which actually indicated the same thing. They talked about the fact that unemployment had hit 13.4%. But what they also stated was that the data released in December 2021 by the Ghana Statistical Service showed that 32.8% of Ghanaians aged 15 to 24 were unemployed. And that I found very troubling. So I wanted to ask you, Dr. Boy, directly regarding that unemployment of youth, and the mention of the Vice President in terms of the creation of the thousands of people who have been recruited. How do you reconcile the two? Because youth unemployment is really a main concern and issue of a lot of people.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You know, if you look at our manifesto that we sent into 2016 before coming into power, the headline, the theme for the manifesto was jobs. The reason is that all the surveys and research showed that the biggest single problem in this country was youth unemployment. In fact, unemployment on the whole, but particularly the youth.
Yes.
So this was a standing problem before we came. And the facts and figures show that we did a lot to create opportunities both in the public sector and in the private sector. And one of the ways to tell, Doc is here, whether opportunities are being created in the economy for people to get jobs is look at GDP growth, whether the GDP is shrinking, is stagnant, or is going up. So I am confident to say that economic activity actually peaked. Ghana at a point when we came for the first 2-3 years was one of the fastest growing economies in the world. We're doing an average of 7% because before COVID. It doesn't mean every youth got a job, but it starts from somewhere. There are some things you use to tell whether a government is creating opportunity. I was at the Ministry of Health. The ministry employed, in fact, in the 3 years, by the time we had done our first term, we had employed over 100,000 health workers. And when you talk to hospitals, there were hospitals that had pharmacies, 2-3 pharmacies for over a 10-year period. They got, clearance to employ from government. I mean, 3-4 times the number in our first term. Kolebu is a classical example. I was a board chairman at Kolebu. When I was at Kolebu as board chair from 2018 to I think somewhere 2019, about 18 months. 1 year, one financial year's clearance that we got to employ nurses was in the figure of about 600 nurses. And I remember one nurse who was on the board said, wow, this is about 1/3 the population of Kolebu teachers in terms of nurses. They had about 1,800 nurses. The point I'm making is that you can only create opportunities in the public sector when your revenues is in a good condition so that you can employ and pay. We did our best in that. At a point in time, we even had to bring in place the NAPCO program, which was more or less a Marshall Plan to pick close to 100,000 unemployed youth at a go.
Let me ask you, Dr. I guess what I was trying to figure out was that if, for example, the figure from the Ghana Statistical Service says that 15 to 24, 32.8%. I appreciate that we've hired thousands, but it would be great if maybe one could say that when we took over in 2017, within that age group, maybe 17% or 50% were unemployed. And now, looking forward now to 2021, the figures are now 32.8%. You know, those kinds of, something we can quantify.
One of the reasons why Dr. Bawumia used the World Bank, and the graphs are very clear. You see, because we want to address a problem, I don't want to dwell so much on the statistics, because if you look at the statistics, it tells you that the problem is going down. I mean, in our time. But when you go like that, people might think that you only want to glorify the issue. So I just want to say statistically, I mean, we're not doing badly, but there is a problem. The problem is that, let's be real, COVID took away the activities of a lot of people, whether you like it or not. When you've closed all your stadia, every economic activity that is connected to the state, people will suffer. Anyone watching this show who is into car rentals, for close to 2 years, they were down.
Yeah.
Anybody who does any business at the airport was virtually doing nothing. All those who rent canopies, chairs, catering, all activities, funerals, outdoors, for close to 2 years, nothing. And guess what? If the job has more or less collapsed, how can the job expand to take new people? So if we have not had these external shocks, you would have expected that opportunities will be created at those businesses that were already in place. Here you are, they are now on the path to recovery. So what I would say is that because of what has happened to us and the world in the past 24 months, if anybody tells me that jobs have been lost and people are, because over the past 2 years, people completed their university education. Youth were chained into the job market. And here you have an economy that has virtually come to a stop globally. Okay. So we have a problem, but the good news is that recovery has started. Okay. And so my prayer is that the recovery will be aggressive so that we create more opportunities. Okay. I mean, recently I talked to a friend. I didn't know of this app, this they call Glovo, or I mean that people order food from restaurants and all that. A lot of the youth are into this activity. Now, if the restaurants have closed because they said there is COVID, the one who would have been picked would not be picked.
Yeah, but on the other hand, those grew because of COVID, meaning that those Glovo and things are because of COVID.
Yeah, because
exactly. So you can see that it's also a job creation in itself in some portion, other ways.
Yes, okay. But on the average, we had issues. So the point is that, you see, we should not talk and act as if we don't know what is happening around us. That will not be fair to all of us. You see, if you are the father in the house and you admit that there's maybe famine or there's a drought, which has reduced the food volumes that you get in the house, then once everybody admits there's famine, it changes the kind of conversation we have. Okay. Now, so I want us to admit the fact that we live in a world where in the last 6 months, the price of fuel has doubled. Now, if petrol, oil on the international market was serving at let's say 75 USD and has gone to about 140 in about 4 months, obviously, and we don't produce the oil, we're not the owners. Government goes to buy oil to sell in Ghana. Once the price doubles, naturally the one who is selling is likely to double. Okay. The other option is not to double, but to subsidize. Okay. But guess what? When you subsidize, you have to find money to pay. The money will come from us. So the point I want to make is that, unfortunately, there are shocks that are happening in the world. We are also feeling the pinch, and the best way out of it is to be aggressive in our recovery, in our economic activity.
All right. Thank you. We'll have to take a quick break, get a message from our sponsors. We'll be right back. This is Talking Point. Topic today is measuring the health of the economy. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Talking Point. Our topic tonight is measuring the health of the economy. In the studio with me to have this discussion on my far left, Dr. Bernard Okoboy, he's a former MP for the Jokuku. And on my immediate left is Professor Gatsi. He's the Dean of the University of Cape Coast School of Business. So before we left, Prof, I was talking to Dr. Boy, and Dr. Boy responded about youth unemployment. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to also do the same before we moved into areas such as tourism.
Before I come to the youth unemployment, I think when we are discussing the issue relating to international crude oil prices, I think we need to do that in context. With respect to Ghana, because I believe we put in our budget around $62 per barrel. At a point, a barrel of crude oil went to around $100, which means that a lot of windfall for government. So that should be a net effect if we are discussing that. So if we just look at refined product importation into the country related to the increase in crude oil prices internationally, then we will not be discussing the issue in whole. We also need to look at the gain that government has made and how government has thought through how to manage that gain in terms of alleviating the plight of people, especially at the downstream. That matter has not been resolved. It's still on the table. When we come to unemployment, I think it's a disaster. When you look at over hundreds of thousands of students graduating from our various tertiary institutions, thinking that they are going into the job market, and it is not there. And over a long period of time, we have been doing what we call intervention. And that intervention is not what economic management result should produce. So it's just like something we are doing to appease the people. And then as soon as they start, 1 month, 2 months, they realize that this thing that they are doing is not what will take them to where they have been trained to go to. So it is not the issue. So let me come back to the growth of the economy. There is a need for us to look critically at the growth of our economy. We have variously described our growth as a growth which is not inclusive. We have described it as jobless growth. We have at a point described it as a growth that is not producing the needed revenue. So the first thing is we need to question this growth. How do we ensure that the growth that we gen up is a growth that produces jobs? It's a growth that produces or contribute to revenue generation. It's a growth that can define new opportunities for our people to participate in terms of economic activities. That should be the conversation. 100,000 NAPCO does not solve any problem, because what NAPCO is supposed to do is that come in, get some cushion, after three years, you exit. Where are you exiting to? To a market that does not have jobs. So that is not the solution. The solution lies in the growth that we churn out. What do we do so that when we say that our growth has inched up by 2%, we should be able to say that that growth is contributing this amount or this percentage to revenue generation, to job creation, and to new opportunities. And if we are not able to do that, all this issue of NAPCO or what YEA, etc., has not been able to solve our problem. So we need to question our growth. That is what we should be doing as a country. But I don't see that happening. And I think those who are managing the economy should know that we are churning out unproductive growth. We are churning out growth that is not contributing the level of revenue that is supposed to be contributing, and the kind of sound jobs that the economy have to generate for people. The growth is not doing so.
So, Dr. Boy, I'll ask you a question. You can just include that in your response.
I think let me add. See, if you are managing an economy and you are able, one way or the other, accounting for jobs in the public sector, which some people, your opponents, will question you anyway. But if you are not able to account for jobs that are being created in a continuous manner from the private sector, which we all believe is supposed to be the engine of growth, then we need to be questioning what is going on. And that is a key thing for all. I mean, you are quoting for your manifesto, so from other political parties, that should be.
Okay, so Dr. Bao, I'll give you 2 minutes to respond.
Let me say that, first of all, the volumes of petroleum finished products that we import into this country is overwhelming compared to the volumes that we export. You know, the usage is huge. So really, when you look at the windfall or the profits that we'll get from the differentials, the increases, is really infinite. It's very minute compared to the volumes that we are importing, such that you cannot there try to use what you've gotten from our exports to try and offset the price differences that for the volumes that were imported. And in fact, it's important to mention to the public, our viewers, that a country like Nigeria, one of the biggest oil producers on the continent, even at some of their filling stations, people are queuing for fuel. There's shortage. The shortage is because they are not even in a good shape to import the volumes that they need with all the supply chain disruptions. So that is just by the way in terms of the exports.
I think that would not answer the issue.
No,
I believe the greatest limitation is the regulation. See, petroleum revenue is accounted for in a particular manner.
Yeah.
There's nowhere in the regulation that says that when you have a windfall, use it in this way. It's supposed to go to the petroleum holding fund. So that is what we need to do. There should be some amendments.
I just wanted. There are some who have talked or suggested that why don't you use
if you talk about volume, revenue is volume times price.
Yeah.
But if your price has gone up by about 50%, the volume issues.
Prof, we should also remember that because inflation, when prices go up, it doesn't affect only families, it affects government as well. So just as you see some margins going up for government in terms of its oil, so would government also pay more for some of the things that it uses because prices go up for all of us. And then let me also mention that the 1D1F, you see, the fact that when COVID happened and activities shrank and the growth rate went to 0.4, it tells you that when you see a growth rate of 7, it's not just a number. It's a culmination of activities. That's improvement in activity in the agri sector, improvement in activity in the mining sector, improvement in fishing. When you bring all together, then it tells you that we are going somewhere. And by the way, growth in the private sector can be measured. We are not saying that it cannot be measured. I mean, when you go to SLEET, the contributions can give you an idea. Even sometimes when you go to a particular sector to count the jobs, there's a way you can get the numbers. So the point I'm making is that we as a government, of course, before COVID, were supporting private sector aggressively through this our 1D, 1F program. Doc mentioned productive growth. I mean, look, Ekunfi, those who are working there, the products we see, they are being employed. It was not for a year. They are still in their jobs. Those who are working at the VW plant, the assembling plant, they were not in those jobs before we came. That is not a government job. Government has only supported the automotive industry through policy and through giving them the necessary structures. So, I mean, that's what I agree with Doc, that the private sector, like we all say, is the engine of growth. And whether I like it or not, for you to support the private sector effectively, you must have some policy measures that will cushion them, and that's what this government has been doing.
So I'm going to ask you a question that I don't think many people want to answer, but I will ask you anyway.
Oh, why not?
All right. So I just wanted to give us some context. You mentioned earlier about expenditure and revenue and the fact that we spend more than we're getting in. So tourism has taken a hit. A lot of the places, tourism before COVID was reputed to be one of the fastest growing, and we're actually looking at it to really show up. So here we have these revenue decreases, which we acknowledged. But there are also new initiatives that were mentioned by the president that are going to be done. And these are important initiatives. I want to say that off the bat. You know, the security services, military housing project, those are all important and welfare issues that were also going to be addressed. So we have those really important issues. And then we also have comments from the general public about how can we fund these things and why are we unwilling to look at certain flagship programs. I think Stephen Adai recently said the size of the government and the public sector wage bill is one issue. Professor Ivan Adai-Mensah has in the past said that reviewing FSHS to focus on quality and not quantity will also be helpful. So in an effort to really stabilize or show up the revenue, why are we unwilling to look at some of these programs that would not necessarily kill them, but would actually maybe at the end of the day make them more robust to be able to address some of these other challenges that we have?
remember Dr. Baumia said that there were 3 items that actually worsened our debt situation. 2 of them were more or less legacy issues we had to deal with. The financial sector. Before we came into office, the mess in the financial sector was not our doing. But if we had looked on, we had close to 5 million Ghanaians who were going to lose their deposits. If your financial sector collapses, your industry cannot survive.
You spent 23 billion though. When you talk about 5 million, you did spend 23 billion.
No, it was actually 25 billion.
25 billion, yes. Yeah.
Now, so that expenditure plus that of excess capacity charges that we have to pay for fuel, for power that you are not using, but because the capacity there you pay. Now, COVID expenditure, 8.1 billion, as Dr. Bayuma mentioned. What even Doc has not added is the revenue shortfall that we had because of COVID, about 12 billion. When you add all, you're also above 20 billion. Now, the good news is that the financial sector expenditure we made is a one-off item. It's not recurring. You don't have to spend that money every year. So luckily, we are not going to have to spend again. Secondly, COVID, the expenditures we made, we are not going to make similar expenditures. In fact, it will be very much reduced because we are not buying vaccines again. We are not going to buy sanitizers again. We are virtually on our way out. Now, the flagship programs, Dr. Bamia mentioned all of them, free SHS, the amount we've spent from 2017 to now, free SHS has been 5.3 billion. You add one district, one factory, 0.4, planting for food and job, 2.9, all came to about 50.6 billion. Guess what? The interest payment alone on these 3 items, the loan for these 3 items, the financial sector, COVID, and the excess capacity charges, is average 8.5 billion annually. Over the past 3 years, just those interest payments are more than all of the flagship programs. The point he wanted to make is that the real problem is not these social programs which cushions the poor and the average Ghanaian family. Like he said, imagine what would have happened with all these fuel prices globally and the food prices going up if a family also had to pay for their wards school fees at the high school. Imagine what would have happened to the farmer if he had to buy fertilizer at commercial rates and not the subsidized rates that Planting for Food and Jobs is happening. Even for NAPCO, Doc says something which I feel a little bit sad about. Sorry, Prof. But usually it's the PhD that normally I salute. As for the Prof, is the papers, but I'll add all. Okay. Professor, Doctor, Prof, I'm sorry. A NAPCO a graduate who is in a NAPCO program, if you go into a program and you are paid even 600, 700, there is greater value in the skills you pick. And I've also been a student who was just out of school before. When I finished secondary school, I went into some pharmacy to try and do some things. I learned some few virtues and values. So really, I know people who went into NAPCO. Today they've been employed, not even by government. They were placed by government to private sectors. Their private employers have seen the worth and value in them. They have jobs. And every CD counts for someone who is not having any cushion. So we are still willing to put some money into NAPCO to support graduates who are unemployed. We are still continuing with our nursing allowances and all that. These are social nets which helps to reduce the suffering of people. So the point I want to make is that it is not the abolishment of these social programs.
No abolishment.
No. But when honestly, when like free SHS, for example, when people mention free SHS, there are some who go like, why don't you look at cost sharing? Let parents also pay, or possibly.
Okay, so let me ask you, for example, the scholarships you have, Cocoa Marketing Board has scholarships. Yeah. So many organizations have scholarships that were given to the students. So it's not necessarily to say that one should. The review would be more comprehensive in terms of finding out ways in which there could be a more robust participation.
We should be tolerant to discussions that talk about how to make a system better.
Exactly.
So, in principle, I agree. But the point Dr. Baumia made that day was that, look, if you look at the 3 major items that has driven our debts from the 59% to the 80%, the financial sector cleanup, the excess capacity payments we make, we are paying more than $500 million every year for power we are not using. Doc is trying to tell us that it is not savings you make from free SHS that will take you out of this quagmire. Okay. But the good news is that there are one-off payments, especially for the COVID and the financial sector. Okay. It is the capacity charges that, unfortunately for us, we have to repeat and pay annually. Right. So I think we should keep these programs, but still tolerate discussions on how to make it better. Okay.
So we've said a lot, Professor.
I think he's misunderstanding my point, and I didn't say that 600 in the pocket of somebody doesn't make sense. But we do know that people are taking 600 is not up to their rent and their transport. So that is not the kind of job our economy should be creating. That's the point I'm making.
Okay.
We need to look at our growth. How do we ensure that when we announce our growth numbers, it can be related to quality jobs? That was the point I was making. So it's not about taking hundreds of thousands of NAPCO people putting under NAPCO and call that is what the economy has produced. Okay. That we cannot agree. I also said that under NAPCO, after 3 years, you're supposed to exit. Where are you going? I think the government should give the percentage of NAPCO that we have employed and the percentage of those people who have exited and they have gotten jobs. That will speak to the issue. But to just say that they have got private people have mentioned them, that is not the kind of things we want to hear in accounting for people from NAPCO who are getting jobs. The issue is the economy should produce sound job, and there is a way of doing that. That is what we need to focus on. So that is that clarification. Now, when you come to the financial sector cleanup, and he's talking about legacy, I believe you know that when you become a new government, revenue stream are legacies. Infrastructure that are put up that you have not started using are legacy. So why should financial sector cleanup be the issue of discussion? Financial sector cleanup costs have been disclosed in our budget every year since 2018. We know about that. So why is it that all of a sudden is the reason why we have hid it? I believe that is not the issue. In any case, this financial sector cleanup was a process. The process started in 2015, where the government then realized that you needed to settle those in the energy sector who are also indebted to the financial sector, so that when you settle them, they settle the banks, liquidity situation stabilizes a little bit. So they promulgated the Energy Sector Levies Act, so that the cash flow or the revenue flow from that will be used to settle the energy sector, and that will have positive effect on the banking sector. That is one. But I believe the government has mortgaged that revenue flow, and with its implication of lesser involvement in the payment at the energy sector, hence some of the decisions they took. So those are the realities. Then again, those who assessed the problem at that time realized that the issue is not only about banking, it's about the financial sector. Therefore, you need to review the financial sector law, Financial Services Authority Law Act 929, and then the banking, banks and specialized deposits taking institutions Act at 930, so that all these things will help to resolve the matter in the banking sector, which means that there was some principle-based approach in dealing with the matter. There are many models of dealing with financial sector crisis. It is the government who decided to choose this model, and this model ended up collapsing businesses. We depend on facilities with some of the financial institutions. This model collapsed banks, and we expected about 9 billion should have been used to settle this challenge. But that 9 billion, we realized later, that 9 billion alone can resuscitate all the banks with different approach. So it is the government that chose this approach, and that approach has created indebtedness of 25 billion. And the government should not run away from that responsibility. And I find it very strange. As we speak, there are banks which are not well capitalized. What that tells you is that if the government meant to save banks, government would have saved the banks. So this issue about we spend 25 billion on the financial sector cleanup, who asks you to use that approach? You feel that per your assessment, that is the best for you. And so it is not a legacy issue. It is something that has been created as a result of policy choice. So I think we need to explain that. When you come to capacity, excess capacity, that is clearly leadership. That is clearly about management. Do we want to say that our experiences, expertise, there is nothing that could be done in terms of the excess capacity? So the government should tell us there is nothing under the sun that should be done to utilize or to make use of that excess capacity. Then we will go in line with government. But this issue, these are legacy issue we have met and the rest. I think it doesn't go down well. In addition to that, he mentioned a third one, COVID-19. And he said that the total expenditure on COVID-19 is 8.1 billion Ghana cedis. But you know the amount of money we borrow in 2020? We borrow 73 billion. We borrow 60.2 billion in 2021. When you put the two together, 133 billion. Are you aware, in all the difficulties we had in this country, we never had a difficulty that comes with quicker inflow of resources. It is COVID that came with quicker inflow of resources. Within a short period of time, Parliament put themselves together. They approved in excess of $219 million, almost about 1.2 billion. Within a short period of time, we put ourselves together, applied to IMF, and we got $1 billion. Okay? And that, at that time, equivalent to almost 6 billion. When you put that together, plus the money Ghanaians contributed, and the monies that we got from other countries, World Bank and the rest, that clear the COVID this thing. So why from this discussion that it is COVID that created that excess, borrowing that we incur in 2020? And don't forget 2020 was election year. And that is what I believe this kind of presentation rekindle the desire for people to ask for expenditure audit of COVID, because the figures do not speak to the kind of borrowing that we did. Okay, and so again, as I explained,
we have to take a quick break. I will be back, and then
all the time.
I know. This is Talking Point on GBC. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back to let's hear a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to Talking Points. Tonight's discussion is about measuring the health of the economy. And in the studio with me on my far left is Dr. Bernard Okoboy. He's a former MP for Lejokuku. And on my immediate left is Professor Gatsi. He's the Dean of the School of Business at the University of Cape Coast. So before the break, Prof, you were trying to wrap up. The operative word is wrap up.
Yeah, so the point I'm making is that government should just agree that there was some limitation in terms of how the COVID economy was managed. Okay. And as I said from the beginning, government has set out to tell Ghanaians that COVID management was so difficult for Ghana than other countries. And when you look at table 7, I will refer to table again because for me, it gives quick visual impression to those who read the document. You see Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Egypt, and Ghana. I will leave US and then UK as outlier countries. You see that the government was able to indicate that in 2019, our debt to GDP ratio was 62.4, and by 2021, it went up to 80% plus. But let us put in focus that in 2018, we did rebasing. That rebasing accommodated our debt to GDP ratio to around 56.6%. Now, if you are not in COVID, you are in normal time, the economy is smooth, it's going on well, and you are able to increase your debt to GDP ratio by 5.4%, that is a huge risk that you have exposed the country to.
Okay.
That is one. Remember, in 2018, again, we did rebasing of the CPI. That was the reason why, when you look at the inflation, okay, that also went down in 2018, 2019. But after that, what I will find it will level. That is what is happening. So the real basis should be accounted for.
Okay.
And if you look at the rest of the country, what the government was doing is to project that we almost 18 percentage point increase in debt to GDP ratio is because of COVID-19. No. Look at Egypt, 7%. Look at Cote d'Ivoire, 12.3%. Look at Nigeria, 6.6%, which again means that I don't know whether the government was aware, but it's telling all of us that they didn't manage COVID-19 period debt to GDP ratio, or the debt management was very poor.
Okay.
And that is the message that they have sent to us.
Okay.
And I believe, well, I don't know.
Okay, well,
what
Dr. Boy, if you can
let me say that if you look at the way we've gone about COVID as a country, it is, I beg to differ from Prof. It is the efficient way that we manage COVID that allowed this country to record one of the lowest mortality rates across the world globally. It is the way we manage COVID that gave us one of the lowest morbidity, that's sick rates. And in fact, the deaths we had in COVID were just, unfortunate as they are, or sad as they are, it's about 1,000 and so number compared to the cases we had, over 124,000 cases or so. Ghana's death contribute to 0.4%, 0.4 of the deaths recorded on African continent. If you are bad in the management, it will show up in the sick and deaths cases that you record. So I differ from Doc that when it comes to COVID, we've managed it well. Now, as a quick response to some of the things Doc said, I wrote them. NAPCO, I also didn't say that the jobs we will boast about or show the public is NAPCO. NAPCO was just a stopgap to give relief to thousands of youth. But we're giving permanent jobs in the health sector, in the agri sector, in security. One of the biggest numbers of recruitments in the security services, you can check from fire, immigration, army, is during the past 4 years. We are trying to close a gap, give opportunities. I always mention Obuasi Mines as an example. This government brought documents to parliament, brought agreements, restructured deals with those who are managing the mines to reinvest close to $1 billion to open that mine. It was closed before we came. And I mentioned VW. I mean, it didn't just start. We brought an automotive policy to Parliament. Those are permanent jobs. So we are doing our best to create jobs also in the private sector. Please, the financial sector clean up. I have heard people, including Prof, on this show say that there are alternatives. We could have gone some other route. The question I ask is that what is the cost of that route? Put a bill to it. Let's see the budget that will come with it. You know, before we came, some people looked on for certain financial institutions to collapse, like DKM. It caused a lot of headache. We couldn't look on for more than 4.6 million Ghanaians to lose their savings. Look, I have read the reports by auditors on some of the banks. I read that of Capital Bank. They were going underwater. They were giving money. Government, before we came, the NDC government, gave them money to help them come out of the distress. Even that money was also applied in some way because it's in courts. But remember, people are being prosecuted. I will not go into details. I remember reading the report on UT Bank. UT, they gave some quantum to one customer. It was more than a threshold. They called a single obligor limit. A bank is not supposed to give so much money beyond a threshold to one person, such that if the person defaults, it can throw you out of gear. What happened? The Banking Supervision Department of Bank of Ghana looked on when some of these things, these breaches were made. And according to the Bank of Ghana Act, the banking and Prof will know the name of the law. So
Act 930.
Exactly, the savings and deposits, the act. There are certain breaches. When you engage in those breaches, your license can be revoked. So when I hear people use the word that, oh, this government collapsed the banks, I say, go and read every community or society that goes by rule of law. For every institution, there are certain regulations. It is to protect all of us. So when you're a bank and you're collecting people's money, they give you regulations. Your minimum ratio, the capital adequacy ratio, some amount of money you have should be this. Don't borrow more than this amount to one person. Some of the banks broke all these rules. They were doing what we refer to as related businesses trading. So you have one company, they've registered another company. They will tell you, oh, my assets are these 3 cars. When you go and check, the same 3 cars are assets for the other company. We saw all these things. I remember I was in a finance committee. Governor Addison came and we asked him, Governor, how come your department, banking supervision department, sat down for all this to happen? What he told us that, I mean, those who appointed those people should have moved, but we should just go forward. He didn't want to go into the politics.
Okay,
so
Dr.
the point,
unfortunately, we are running out of time. So
just
1
30
minute
seconds.
to finish and then
So
go to
the point,
messages.
what I want to say is that look, some of the like the table Doc mentioned, when you look at the debt to GDP ratio, Doc says that once our increase was more, then we didn't manage it well. But I was just checking, the size of Nigeria's economy is about 3 trillion Ghana cedis. Our economy is about 370 billion. 1% expenditure in terms of debt, GDP, is about 3.7 billion for Ghana. When Nigeria does 1%, it's about 30 billion Ghana cedis. So sometimes the percentage, because they have a huge economy, 1% looks small, but when you look at the nominal terms, it's huge. Okay. So basically, I think the viewer wants to get some assurance that what is going to happen to me going forward in terms of prices. Let me say that there are 2 main things that are driving the prices: the cost of fuel on the international market and our CD performance. Okay. Luckily, the CD has stabilized. Let's pray that fuel will also stabilize and all of us will get out of these challenges.
All right, so let me just quickly read some messages. Good evening and good evening, my prof. The government always makes noise about spending 25 billion cedis on the financial sector cleanup. Government is still owing financial institutions, especially capital market operators. So where did they spend the huge sums of money? Doctor, the banking, if the NPP manage the economy, why then the downgrade by Fritz? Could Ghana not export the extra capacity generated? The banking sector cleanup was selected because many of us today have money in financial institutions that we have not yet accessed due to liquidity. Please ask these don't have names, so I'm just reading. Please ask the NDC man if he is in the if he was in the position, what would we have done? So there's nobody here for me to ask that question. So another person says, I feel very sad whenever I hear NPP members talking as if NAPTO existed. We are all home now, hungry, and don't know where to find a job. Thank you, Prof. Please tell Dr. Oku to address the professor properly. He ended. Prof is not, you know, easy to get professor. Anyway, thank you, Prof, for settling the financial sector cleanup dogma by Dr. Oku. They always worry our ears with either COVID-19 or financial sector cleanup or the war in Ukraine. Abba, Dr. Oku, just tell us the truth and eat the humble pie like your predecessors, like Honorable Barredu did in the past. And then finally a name here. This is from Michael from Adenta. Still struggling to come to terms about why Dr. Bawumia continues to mention the banking sector debt as part of the national debt stock. All over the world, when the financial services sector is in crisis, plans are initiated to rescue firms in trouble. That way, jobs are kept and the confidence in the financial services is maintained. The funds borrowed to collapse the banks and create unemployment, could that not have been used to salvage the banks and to keep jobs? Could the borrowings not have been given to the banks as support and later for them to repay it, rather for it to become a national debt? It is difficult to rationalize why a good economists like Dr. Bawumia will borrow to collapse banks and create unemployment, destroy businesses, and then the borrowing now becomes a debt for the Ghanaian taxpayers to pay. Anytime it comes up, I struggle to understand the motives. I think we may read a little bit more and then we have to stop. One more. This is from CK Senchim at Ho. Good evening. One thing we must NAPCO is not anything new. Youth unemployment was there and was quoted by NAPCO. And the final one, please, on youth unemployment, the problem partly is due to the types of graduates the university are churning out. Most of the graduates are just unemployable due to the courses our universities are offering them. Most of the courses are too theoretical and less or no practical. So unfortunately, you can't respond. We are out of time. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. I know to be able to give some 30 seconds. You mean, not minutes?
Yeah, 30 seconds. 30
okay.
seconds.
And then we'll have to wrap up.
We need to distinguish between the models I'm talking about and the wrong people did. Those wrong should be punished, but it should not lead to collapse of the banks when we use other models. So I think get that difference. Okay. Then again, when there is a downgrade, it's a judgment against the performance of the government. So for the vice president using that as that is one of the problems we are facing. That is unfortunate. It's a judgment that you have not managed the financials and the debt management well, and they cannot foresee that you'll be able to repay without some risk. So that is what the downgrade made, and you shouldn't misquote it and then misapply it.
Okay, so you want to give your closing remarks, because we are after he goes, we won't come back. So 1 minute. We'll invite you back. 1 minute.
Oh, okay.
Chapter we'll do part 2.
Yes, 1 minute.
Okay. So the point I'm trying to make is that the financial sector is so key, and when you are touching it, you should be circumspect. You should look at the broader implication of that, and I believe that was not looked at. It is the duty of the government to say that, look, the model that you are talking about, we also have it, but when we do our permutation, this is the cost, this is the implication for this one. But the government doesn't want to speak to anybody. So how do we believe that you have done the right thing?
Okay, all right, Dr. Boyd.
Yeah, so let me say that a lot of consultations happened before we did the financial sector, restructure review. Let's remember that Capital Bank was fused with GCB. The liabilities were carried to GCB. Government supported through some of these finances. UT Bank also went to GCB. Some people in this country don't even know that other banks like ADB, Omni, NIB, out with the finance committee, government used a special vehicle to support them with funds.
So 1 minute for your closing remarks.
Oh, all right. So let me say that I think for the viewer,
yes,
like I said, 2 main things account for the prices that went up. I'm being forthright. Is the jump in prices of oil. It affects everything. And unfortunately, not all of them are within our control. But the city performance is within our control. So we've worked hard to slow down the depreciation. Okay. And I believe that going forward, things will pick up.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us on Talking Point tonight, and a very, very special thank you to my guests on my far immediate left, Professor John Gatsi, Dean of the University of Cape Coast School of Business, and on my far left, Dr. Bernard Okoboy, former MP for Lejokuku. I'm Dr. Name Wright, and this has been Talking Points. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday with us. As always, good night, good luck, and please be and take care. Till next week.
Thank you.